The amendments on informed consent and genetic advice, this is something that alongside the Shadow Rapporteur we've gone into more. This was very helpful. I'd like to thank our colleagues for this, and some of our colleagues have a lot of experience in the area of genetic engineering here. And we've gone into more detail in terms of what minimum standards we want. It will be up to member states to be more specific and go beyond the standards that we want if they see fit. And there should be expert advice for patients wanting DNA analyses. And then in terms of predictive tests regarding that people's health future, there were different opinions in terms of the difference between that and those tests that only highlight a current diagnosis. But if it turns out that you have a genetically based possible illness that would have an influence on children, then that would need advice. In terms of companion diagnoses, there are different criteria there as compared to a young person that's 18 years old, for example, and hears that they will suffer a serious illness later on in life, that there's no preventative measures and they can't be dealt with. That would be a different case there. And the legal service need to talk about the legal side of things here, the legal report to be drawn up by a medical institute. And we've been told that we do have the legal basis here, and that we have to draw up certain points in line with the Charter of Fundamental Rights in terms of informed consent. And then there are a few amendments from colleagues. We've been in very constructive dialogue with them. Rebecca Taylor looked at in-house tests particularly, and I think we're on the right track there. Her amendment is a good basis for a possible compromise. We don't want to have all kinds of different tests on the market in hospitals and so on without authorizations. But if there aren't commercially marketed tests, for example, for serious diseases, then we need the exception, and the text from Rebecca Taylor sets that out. And I would suggest that the amendment on Annex 1 for particularly risky cases here, that would be important. But there's also the issue of bureaucratic rules. And the GUI Shadow Rapporteur came up with a lot of amendments, and there's a proposal of setting out the definition of innovative IVDs and including them in those ones in Class D. So far, I'm not that convinced, and I would call upon the Commission to talk about this. But we need to talk about this. The innovation, is that a risk in itself, enough of a risk to justify the top risk class? And then there's been the discussion regarding companion diagnostics for personalised medicines. Here, the EMA needs to be consulted. The issue is how. And I'm quite keen on an amendment that would say that we would call the EMA in to set out the definition of these, of the CTS, the common standards, and that would be included there. We need to check that. And then there are a couple of points before I wrap up: transparency, and then the issue of the Ethics Commission for clinical trials and clinical performance studies, as we have to call them in the text. This is particularly important regarding the vote on the Wilmot report, And this afternoon's outcome will influence our further discussion. I am pro a high degree of transparency. Patients should know what's going on and how safe these products really are. In terms of total transparency, the question is, what about data protection and intellectual property rights? And the shadow rapporteur has got quite a good approach in terms of solving this particular problem. Involving the ethics committee, well, I'm still struggling through with the compromise from this morning. I have a different proposal. I think that the ethics committee should give its formal go-ahead, and then there needs to be an unbureaucratic way of dealing with this with the national authorities. But in terms of a negative vote from the ethics committee, whether you need a clinical performance study, well, I think that would be very difficult, and I would be happy if, alongside Ms. Wilmot and Brock Berendt and so on, we were to get together and find a different solution. And that's something that, following the vote and the discussion this afternoon, we'll have to look at. But my proposal is that we should have a yes vote from the ethics committee before being able to go ahead and making sure that there's no associated risk for the patient involved. And
in relation to the in-house exemption, which the rapporteur, Dr. Lisa, mentioned, I very much appreciate that the rapporteur and fellow shadows have been very supportive of my approach and have recognised the need to meet public health concerns by going a little bit further than the Commission proposal. And I think the wording I tabled in amendments 138, 141 and 142, along with colleagues Linda McAvan and Marina Yannikadakis, provides a sort of middle way that I think gives us some good options to work with. Thank you.
And then when it comes to in-house testing, I'm very pleased with the proposed amendment, which I think we need to build on. But I just want to mention that this exception should not be granted at the expense of patient safety under any circumstance. And we must make sure that we do not introduce any loopholes into the legislation that would then allow people to sort of introduce high-risk products under this exemption later.